What is this brick-shaped face bozo saying now?
USA! 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 Wah! Yes!
Hey, wow, he's such a fucking clown, man. It took him quite a while to sync up. Ah, is this him trying to express human emotions? Unbelievable, man. Do you know what? It's quite relevant that we're talking about Musk all of a sudden, because do you guys recall, and if you're Learning Box viewers, you should recall, because I made a video about this. Do you recall Elon Musk's peace plan for Russia and Ukraine 2 years ago now? Do you guys recall Elon Musk, who initially supported Ukraine? He tweeted out supportive things. He donated Starlink terminals to Ukraine. Thousands of them, if I remember correctly. But then, a few months into the invasion, he starts to change his tune a little bit. And then starts coming up with things like this. His peace proposal for Russia and Ukraine. He says, Russia, Ukraine, peace. Redo elections of annexed regions under UN supervision. Russia leaves, if that is the will of the people. 2. Crimea, formerly part of Russia, as it has been since 1783 until Khrushchev's mistake. Wow. Water supply to Crimea assured. Ukraine remains neutral. Now, what's interesting about this is, are these claims not all quite similar? A little bit in sync with what Putin himself wants. Crimea, formerly part of Russia, what was it? The transferring of Crimea by Khrushchev a mistake? Recall that in 1991, when Ukraine voted for independence, every province voted in favor of it, including Crimea. And Russia, in 1994, agreed to respect those borders. In the Budapest Memorandum, they agreed it with Ukraine, they agreed it with the United States, the UK, and they agreed it in exchange for Ukraine giving up their nuclear weapons that were left by the Soviets. And you're like, okay, who have you been talking to? And given it's Elon Musk, okay, he's a tech bro. This is probably, at the time, I thought, maybe Elon's just doing that thing where he gets stoned, he reads a few alt media articles, and he buys into the propaganda and just flips because he wants to seem like he's unique. You know, he's against the establishment. He's an outside the box thinker. That's what he sees himself as, right? So, you know, water supply, honing on the Russian outrage at Ukraine closing that dam that supplies water from Ukraine to Crimea, which they did, by the way. And it's debatable, the ethics of that. I don't think they should have done it. But you understand that they did that in the context of Russia setting up Crimea as a launch pad to invade Ukraine. That at the time that Ukraine did this, Russia was conscripting tens of thousands of soldiers and beefing the shit out of the place to set it up to be a launch pad to invade Ukraine. They were militarizing the entire area. That's why they did it. Redo elections of annexed regions. Again, this is after Putin annexed 4 other regions. After he annexed, Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson, Zaporizhia. So apparently Russia is entitled to have an independence referendum in regions that they didn't even control fully. They didn't even control most of Kherson and Zaporizhia at this time. And apparently redo elections of annexed regions, after a bunch of the people who oppose Russia have fled. And after Russia has moved settlers into places like Mariupol and places like around Donetsk and Luhansk, because they did that by this point. And we're planning to go further. Really, and Crimea apparently because the people who opposed Russia fled Crimea and people who support Russia moved in. Now it's obviously solidified the Russian claim. They didn't cut off water from Crimea, they just made Russia supply it. Yeah, I know, it wasn't even like a proper people make it seem like they were doing siege tactics or something. It wasn't even like that, yeah. And obviously no NATO, whatever. But now, it turns out there was and Tatars being murdered on, the indigenous population of Crimea. Obviously, they don't matter to Elon Musk. Yeah, wait, what do you mean 1783? How did Russia get a hold of Crimea? Okay. Why is there a Russian population that's quite sizable in Crimea? Why? Is it maybe because they purged the local Tatar population and deported all of them in the Second World War? Is it literally because Russia colonized Crimea and continues to do so? Anyway, in any case, it's a bit less surprising now that he had this pivot, because it turns out, as reported by the Wall Street Journal, apparently Elon Musk has been in regular contact with Putin since late 2022. Remember that tweet? Late 2022, October? It seems that as part of his endeavors largely to do with space programs, he's been chatting with Putin. They've been pulling each other's knobs and licking each other's ears for a little while now. Confirmed by US, European, and Russian officials. They talk about business, geopolitics, personal issues, personal topics. Vladimir, my wife left me. Apparently, at one point, Putin asked Musk to avoid activating Starlink over Taiwan. And the reason they would have done that is because Putin wanted to do a favor to China, because at this time, Putin was becoming increasingly dependent on China for trade after the sanctions. The Tatars came back en masse, right? They did, but a lot of them died on the way to being deported. A lot of them died. And when they came back, they were never given any compensation or restitution. So a lot of them had to resort to squatting because they couldn't get homes, because the land trade in Crimea is insanely corrupt. It's basically just like a hub for shady Russian businessmen to do their under-the-counter deals. And given that Musk is now one of the biggest backers, he's like the richest man in the world, he openly backs Trump, and he owns one of the largest social media platforms for political communication in the world, and makes very partisan decisions with how he moderates that platform. It's insane. It's so funny that, again, Republicans will fucking throat every single conspiracy theory under the sun. But here you have some of the most powerful Americans in the country pissing about behind the scenes with Russians. That's like a Cold War, it's like a Tom Clancy novel. It's like a Cold War fantasy to have this kind of connection. It's the kind of stuff people would write novels about 50 years ago. And it's happening. So they have these meetings. He says it's absurd that he's a Putin apologist, but he literally repeats Putin talking points. Even in this tweet, you notice that he's repeating a Putin talking point here when he says, this is a likely outcome in the end, question of how many died before then. It's also worth noting that a possible, albeit unlikely outcome from this conflict is nuclear war. Yeah. Nuclear war. This is Putin. This is around the same time Putin was threatening to use nukes over attacks on Crimea. Look at the replies here. Oz, Vosh. And it's ironic that this has been happening, given that I didn't know this about, I mean, it should have known this about Musk. Musk has quite close ties with US military and intelligence agencies as well, because of SpaceX and their connections to NASA. I think SpaceX right now is one of the primary rocket launcher for NASA and the Pentagon. So he has quite a lot of power in the US. He's got a security clearance. He has access to some classified information. He gets billions of dollars in contracts. And he's fucking about privately with Putin and not telling people about it, not disclosing this. And this is the same time, by the way, when Putin is listed by the Treasury as an enemy. He's blacklisted. He's up there on the same list as Kim Jong-un, Bashar al-Assad, Lukashenko. And it seems to be that Russia was actually pressuring Musk around May 2022, publicly and privately. I think there was a Russian space chief who wrote a Telegram post. This is all in the Wall Street Journal article. There was a Russian space chief who warned Musk about supplying Starlink to the Azov battalion. He said that Musk was going to have to answer like an adult for supplying Starlink to the Azov battalion. He actually made a threat like that. Yeah. And around this time, people in the Kremlin were having discussions with him. And then that's when his opinions start to change. Then in September 2022, just before he made that tweet, he was blocking the Israeli military from using Starlink terminals to guide their attacks in Crimea. to attack naval bases. So Ukraine is trying to hit military targets in Crimea, but they can't use Starlink anymore. And then Musk suddenly pivots to say that, he's afraid of a nuclear war. He said he did it because he wanted Starlink to only be for civilian uses. But then Starlink at the time was one of the few military advantages that Ukraine had. So he's doing these favors for Russia. He's making horrible excuses for it. Russians are using Starlink. Yeah, that's true as well. At least according to Ukrainian officials, the Russian occupying forces, like the Russian forces in Ukraine, are using Starlink. Yeah. For communications and to extend the range of their drone attacks. It's such an unbelievable story. Also, by the way, this is not the only Russian that Musk was talking to. Musk was also talking to a guy called Sergei Kirienko, who I think he was a deputy chief of staff for Putin at one point. And this guy, Kirienko, actually got in trouble recently from the Justice Department because if you remember that story from September of Tim Pool, Lauren Southern, Lauren Chen, etc., taking money, knowingly or otherwise, from the Russian government to spread propaganda that benefits Russia. Well, in the same announcement from the Justice Department, which actually I think we didn't really cover that much, was that they also seized 32 internet domains that were being used by the Russian government to direct foreign influence on the presidential campaign. And you might think, well, again, if you're another country and you want to create websites that work in America, what's wrong with that? Well, the problem is that they were violating trademark laws and also in violation of US money laundering, because you'll see why in a minute. The problem with these websites that Kirienko was running, again, this is a guy who has met with Elon Musk. The problem with these websites that he was using was that they were disguised to look like legitimate American news sources. This is exhibit 1 of a website called WashingtonPost.pm. These are their headlines. They just copied American mainstream media sources and used them to spread propaganda, fake news stories. And what they would do is they would post links to these things on Twitter from people posing as either activist groups or NGOs or even just people posing as regular US citizens. And then they would get bots to spread them around. Migrant crisis will bury something future with Ukraine. No more money. Kremlin will solve Ukraine's problems. From the Washington Post. This just came out a couple of days ago. This is what's happening in the American election. It's literally everything. People in the Republican Party got excited by the Hunter Biden laptop and the fact that he was making a bit which we now know that he was making money at Burisma, and potentially Biden might have given him a fucking leg up, even though the evidence for that is really weak. And for what? The fact that Hunter Biden, all those years at Burisma, was earning less money than Dave Rubin and Tim Pool got from the Kremlin in 1 year. They got that excited about a laptop, but this is nothing to them. They don't give a fuck. I don't know. I like the fact, and again, the problem with this story as well is that it's not actually going to change anything. It's not going to change anything. No one's changing the way they vote because of this, even though by their own standards, they have been so outraged at foreign influence in the country for less. They were so outraged about Hunter Biden and Burisma, but this apparently is A-okay. And the fact that they made these fake websites and then used paid social media ads and fake profiles. It's all the same thing that they did actually that was uncovered in the Mueller investigation. The Mueller investigation also found fairly sizable Twitter accounts for the time, because I think 70,000 to 80 or 100,000 followers at the time of 2016 was actually fairly reasonable. And there were these accounts where Russians were pretending to be regular US citizens talking about politics and spreading stories. And some of these people got retweeted and engaged with by mainstream figures. Like their tweets were used in newspaper articles. some of these Russian operatives were retweeted by the likes of Sean Hannity and other Republican politicians, which isn't even to mention them actually speaking behind the scenes, like people from the Trump campaign talking to people about how they were going to coordinate the fucking dropping of WikiLeaks stories to damage the Clinton campaign. But now it's Elon Musk who owns Twitter. Imagine going from 2016 and Mueller to, in 8 years' time. In 8 years' time, you're going to have... In 8 years' time, you're going to have this Twitter website is actually going to be owned by someone who is friendly with Putin and other shady Russian officials. And he's going to have security clearances in the United States. And he's also going to be supporting Trump. And he's also going to be fundraising for Trump while he does it. Oh, it's mental. Oh, God. Who wants to put chips in people's brains? Yeah, I know. But apparently this is all Democrat hysteria. Oh, the double standard is so infuriating. Fuck these people, man. But at least, you know what? There's something kind of satisfying about it, because I was always so curious about where the hell this came from Mr. Musk. No. Because I remember he was on Twitter at the beginning of the war, talking about how he backs Ukraine and challenging Putin to a fist fight, like being kind of like coy about his support for Ukraine. And then he switched so suddenly. And apparently Musk has had a bit of an interest in Russia for quite a while. I think even in about 2002, Musk had traveled to Moscow to purchase rockets for his, what was then a fledgling company, fledgling project. So I mean, like the administrator, like one of the NASA administrators has said that there should be an investigation into this, but it's all just too soon, right? Are we really, like, before the election going to get a DOJ announcement about Musk doing this with Putin? Probably not. It's probably going to take a while. It's probably going to take a lot of fact finding and a lot of digging in to see what's going on here. I wonder if Russia has some blackmail on Musk. Well, apparently, this was by Musk's biographer. So in 2002, when Musk was in Russia trying to negotiate to buy rockets for his company, apparently the negotiated meeting was happening over lunch. And apparently he drank so much vodka at this lunch that he passed out. and the sale failed. So given what Elon Musk is like, and given how apparently socially inept he is as a human being, it wouldn't really surprise me if Musk had embarrassed himself or done something that the Russians could have on him. But I don't know. I mean, it's all, and not to mention that even for Trump's potential presidency, apparently, yeah, Trump wants to make Musk the head of a government efficiency commission. Because I think Trump has learned from 2016, and obviously from January 6th, that if he's going to appoint people, he's not going to appoint people based on skill and merits and what they can do for the country or whatever. He's going to be much more selective in appointing the kind of people who will just do everything he wants them to. And Musk, by the way, denies that Starlink is being used by Russia, even though Russian troops have been using Starlink terminals at like an increasing scale, according to every other intelligence organization that is in the area. It really makes me feel for Ukraine, because I imagine the Ukrainians know all this. They know that Elon is a Putin simp and that Trump is a Putin simp. They know the Republican position on helping Ukrainians. They know Putin's position. They know that Putin likes Trump. They know that even people from the Trump campaign in 2016 had discussed Russian peace plans with Russians during the election. That was one thing as well. I think it was Paul Manafort who discussed a peace plan with someone who was most likely believed to be a Russian intelligence guy, Konstantin Kilimnik, a Russian intel officer. And we've come such a long way, pardoned by Trump, obviously, because the Mueller investigation did turn out indictments and convictions. And also strongly suggested that Trump had obstructed justice in around 10 instances. So, yes, I know Manafort also shared internal polling. Yes. Well, good luck, guys. Good luck with the upcoming election. Wild. Very wild.